The heavy silver frame was cold in her hands. Grace polished the ornate scrollwork with a soft cloth, her movements economical and practiced. Inside the frame, a woman with dark, laughing eyes stared out, frozen in a moment of uncomplicated joy. Grace knew the face was Marco Moretti's late wife, Isabella. She knew because every Tuesday, it was her job to dust this room, his private study, a place of dark leather, aged wood, and the lingering scent of sandalwood and regret. The silence of the mansion was a living thing, a weight she had learned to move through without disturbing. She was good at her job. She was invisible. That was the foundation of her survival here. Be efficient, be silent, be invisible. He was a man who commanded entire boroughs with a glance, a man whose quiet words could end bloodlines. She was just the maid, a sturdy, unassuming woman who kept his world orderly and clean. The arrangement worked, until today. The heavy oak door swung inward without a sound. Marco Moretti entered, not alone. With him was his cousin, a man named Luca whose smile was always too sharp, too hungry. They did not see her. She was in the far corner, partially obscured by a wingback chair, the silver frame still in her hands. Her heart gave a single, hard thump against her ribs. Rule 1 was to never be in his private spaces when he was. She froze, a ghost caught in the light. "It has to be done tonight," Luca said, his voice a low, urgent thing. "The shipment comes in at the docks. While everyone is focused there, we take out the Irishman. Consolidate the territory. It's the perfect time." Marco moved to the decanter on his desk, his back to them both. The cut of his dark suit was perfect, making his broad shoulders seem even more formidable. He did not answer immediately. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, the clink of glass on glass the only sound. "No," he said finally. The word was flat, absolute. "No? Marco, this is the opportunity we've been waiting for. It's a clean cut." "It is a sloppy one," Marco corrected, his voice dangerously soft. "It is an emotional one. You want this because you hate him, not because it is smart." He turned, holding one of the glasses. His eyes, the color of dark coffee, swept the room and found her. They found Grace. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The air thickened, becoming heavy and hard to breathe. Luca followed his cousin's gaze, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Well, what do we have here?" Grace's training, her instinct for invisibility, screamed at her to disappear. But there was nowhere to go. She simply stood, the silver frame a useless shield in her hands. Marco's expression did not change. It remained a mask of cold control, yet she saw something shift in the depths of his eyes. He had not known she was there. It was a detail he had missed, and Marco Moretti did not miss details. He looked at her, then at the frame she was holding. He took a slow step forward. The world she thought she was in, a world of quiet servitude and predictable days, dissolved. The world she was actually in had rules she had just broken, and the penalty was absolute. He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the heat coming off his body. He looked down at the photograph of his dead wife, then back up at her face. And now she could not leave. The silence in the room stretched until it was thin enough to snap. Luca watched them both, his eyes alight with malicious amusement. He was a predator enjoying the unexpected arrival of new prey. Marco, however, was something else entirely. His focus was so complete, so absolute, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. He did not seem angry. He seemed calculating, as if she were a column of numbers that did not add up. "Put it down," he said. His voice was not a request. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she placed the silver frame back on the mahogany side table. She kept her eyes lowered, fixed on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. To meet his gaze felt like a trespass she could no longer afford. She had heard a name. She had heard a plan. She was a witness. In this house, witnesses did not walk away. They were scrubbed from the ledger, erased like a stray mark. "Leave us," Marco said to his cousin, his gaze never leaving Grace. Luca's smile faltered. "Marco, we can't just—" Now the single word was laced with steel. It was the voice of a man who was not accustomed to being questioned. Luca hesitated for a fraction of a second, his jaw tight, before giving a sharp nod and exiting the study, closing the heavy door behind him with a definitive click. The sound echoed like a cell door locking. They were alone. Grace's mind raced, searching for an excuse, a plausible lie. She had been finishing her duties. She had not heard anything. She could swear on it. But she knew it was useless. A lie would be an insult to his intelligence, and an insult he would not forgive. The truth was her only option, as terrifying as it was. "You heard," he stated. It was not a question. She forced herself to meet his eyes. Yes, her voice was a small, tight thing. He studied her face, his own a blank canvas. She was a big woman, soft and rounded in a way that was the opposite of the sharp, angular people who usually populated his world. She had always used her size to her advantage, to seem harmless, matronly, invisible. Now, it just made her feel like a larger target. He took another step closer, invading her space until the scent of his cologne, a clean, sharp scent of cedar, filled her senses. "You are new here," he said. 6 months. She nodded, surprised he knew the exact length of her employment. To him, she should have been nothing more than a part of the household machinery. "You do your work well. You are quiet. You keep to yourself." He was reciting her file, or the file that existed in his head. He saw everything. He remembered everything. That was far more terrifying than any threat. "What is your name?" "Grace," she whispered. He tested the word, his expression unreadable. "Grace," he said her name differently than anyone else had. It was not a name but a label, a problem he now had to solve. He walked over to the desk and picked up the second glass of whiskey he had poured. He held it, swirling the liquid, his attention on the glass, but she knew his focus was entirely on her. She waited for the verdict. Would it be a dismissal, or something far more permanent? She had come to this house for a reason. The pay was triple what any other domestic job offered, enough to handle the mountain of debt her family had left her. She knew who Marco Moretti was. Everyone in the city knew. She had told herself it was just a job. Clean the house, collect the check, stay out of the way. She had managed it for 6 months. But her invisibility had failed her. "You understand the position you are in," he said, finally looking up from the glass. "I understand that I am no threat to you," she replied, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I heard nothing of consequence. I will forget it." A flicker of something, not amusement, but perhaps grim acknowledgement, crossed his face. "People who work for me do not forget things, Grace. They remember them with perfect clarity. That is why they are useful." He set the glass down. "You will no longer be cleaning the rest of the house. Your duties will be confined to this wing, my personal suites and this study. You will not speak to any of the other staff. You will not leave the grounds. A room will be prepared for you upstairs. You are no longer a day worker. You live here now." It was not a punishment. It was a cage. A gilded, comfortable cage, but a cage nonetheless. He was not firing her. He was not disposing of her. He was containing her. Because he could not trust her to forget, he would ensure she had no one to tell. She was his secret now, his liability. Her life, the quiet, independent life she had so carefully built, had just ended. It had been taken from her in the space of a single, overheard conversation. The door was locked and he held the only key. Her new life began that evening. A small, well-appointed room on the 3rd floor became her world. It was a suite, larger than her entire apartment, with a private bath and a window that overlooked the sprawling, manicured gardens. It felt like a prison cell decorated by a designer. Her movements were not restricted by locked doors, but by the silent, watchful presence of Marco's men, who seemed to materialize in corridors whenever she ventured too far. The other staff, people she had shared quiet lunches with, now avoided her eyes, their faces a mixture of fear and pity. She was marked. She belonged to him now, in a way that had nothing to do with employment. Her duties were simple. She cleaned his study, his bedroom, his private sitting room. She saw the evidence of his life up close. The books he read, histories of war and strategy. The single photograph of Isabella, always facing his chair. The suits laid out by his valet, each one a uniform of dark, expensive wool. She learned the rhythm of his life without ever speaking to him. He was an early riser, out of the house before she began her work. He returned late, long after she had retired to her room. They existed in the same space, but on different timelines, like ghosts haunting the same wing. This forced proximity was a strange kind of intimacy. She touched the things he touched, breathed the air he breathed. She saw the faint indentation his head left on the pillow, the glass of water he left on the nightstand. She saw the man, stripped of his power and entourage, in these small human details. It was a dangerous knowledge. It made him real, and a real man was harder to fear than a monster. One evening, a week into her confinement, she was dusting the books in his study when she found one left open on his desk. It was a collection of poetry. Tucked inside was a faded photograph, not of his wife, but of a young man who shared Marco's dark eyes and serious expression. On the back, a single word was written in elegant script. Antonio, his brother. She had heard the whispers among the older staff. Antonio Moretti, the younger brother, the one who was supposed to be the legitimate face of the family. He had been killed years ago, a casualty of a rival family's ambition. They said Marco had never been the same since. He had been a different man when his brother was alive. Lighter, quicker to smile. She carefully placed the photograph back in the book and closed it. This was his wound. The loss of his brother was the ghost that truly haunted this house, far more than the memory of his wife. Isabella's death was a tragedy. Antonio's was a failure of protection, the one thing a man like Marco Moretti was supposed to guarantee. She felt a pang of something she refused to name. It felt too much like empathy, and empathy for a man like him was a liability she could not afford. The tension in the house grew thicker in the following days. There were more cars, more men in dark suits speaking in low voices. Luca was a frequent visitor, his presence a discordant note in the house's grim symphony. He always seemed to be watching her, his eyes lingering whenever they crossed paths. He knew she was a loose thread, and she had the distinct feeling he wanted to be the one to pull it. One night the alarms blared, a piercing, relentless sound that shattered the quiet of the mansion. Grace's heart leaped into her throat. A security breach. Before she could even process what was happening, the door to her room burst open. Marco stood there, a gun in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. He moved with a predatory grace that was terrifying to behold. "With me," he commanded. He did not wait for an answer. His hand closed around her upper arm, his grip like steel, and he pulled her out of the room and down the corridor. The house was in chaos, men shouting orders, the alarm still screaming. He half-dragged, half-shielded her down a service staircase she knew well, his body a solid wall between her and the unseen threat. They emerged in the main kitchen, which was empty. He pushed her toward the reinforced door of the pantry. "Stay here. Do not open this door for anyone but me." He looked at her, his eyes boring into hers, and for a second, the mask slipped. She saw not the cold boss, but a man stretched to his limit, a flicker of raw desperation in his gaze. It was the look of a man terrified of failing to protect someone again. He locked the door from the outside, plunging her into darkness. She was safe. She was also trapped. The alarms cut out moments later, replaced by an even more unnerving silence. She waited, her body thrumming with adrenaline. An hour passed, then another. She had a choice. She could stay put, follow his order. Or she could use the knowledge she had, the knowledge of an invisible servant. There was a secondary latch on this door, a release hidden behind a loose panel, meant for staff who accidentally got locked in. She could leave. She could run out the back over the garden wall and disappear into the city. This was her chance. Her one and only chance to be free. But as she reached for the panel, she hesitated. She thought of the look in his eyes. She thought of Luca's hungry smile. This breach was not random. It was a test, a message, and she was almost certain she was the target. If she ran, they would find her. But if she stayed, she could warn him. She knew a weakness in the security, a blind spot in the camera coverage near the west gate she had noticed weeks ago, a place where the gardeners left a service entrance unlocked. It was a small detail, but Marco Moretti's world was built on details. She did not open the main door. Instead, she slipped out through the hidden latch, her heart pounding. She did not run for the wall. She ran back into the house, back towards the danger, looking for him. She found him in the security room, a high-tech bunker in the basement. He was watching a bank of monitors, his face grim. When he saw her, he went rigid, his hand instantly going to the gun at his waist. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice a low growl. "The west gate," she said, breathless. "There's a blind spot, a service entrance. That's how they got in." His eyes narrowed, searching her face, testing her words for deceit. He turned to one of his men. "Check the footage from the west perimeter. Quadrant 4. The man's fingers flew across a keyboard. A few seconds later, he swore under his breath. "She's right, boss. The sensor was tripped 30 minutes before the main alarm. They bypassed it. Came in clean." Marco turned back to her. The air between them crackled with unspoken things. She had a chance to escape, to save herself. But she had chosen to come back. She had chosen to help him. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time she did not feel like a liability or a prisoner. She felt like an asset. She felt seen. And in his world, to be seen by him was the most dangerous and coveted thing of all. Therefore, everything that came next was not a matter of chance, but a consequence of the choice she had just made. The aftermath of the security breach settled over the house like a fine layer of dust. The atmosphere grew heavier, colder. Marco's trust in his inner circle was fractured, and the only person he seemed to trust less than anyone else was Grace. He moved her from the third-floor suite to a room adjoining his own. The official reason was for her protection. She knew it was for his. He wanted her close, where he could watch her, where her knowledge could not slip beyond his grasp. She now saw him every day. He would be there in the mornings, drinking coffee and reading reports at a small table in his sitting room while she cleaned. He never spoke to her, but his presence filled the space, a silent, constant pressure. She learned the nuances of his moods from the tension in his shoulders, the way he held his jaw. She saw the exhaustion that carved faint lines around his eyes, lines that were not there a month ago. He began to ask her questions, small things at first. Had she seen a particular gardener near the east wing? Did the new driver speak to anyone on the kitchen staff? He was using her. Her invisibility, the very thing that had endangered her, was now her value. She moved through the house as she always had, a ghost with eyes and ears, and she reported what she saw. She gave him facts, observations, nothing more. One afternoon, she overheard two of the younger housekeepers talking in whispers in the linen closet. They were worried about one of the valets, a young man named Paolo, who had been quiet and nervous for weeks. They had seen him taking a package from a car that did not belong to the family. They were afraid for him. Grace knew Paolo. He was a good kid, saving money to bring his mother over from the old country. She also knew that if she told Marco, Paolo would disappear. That evening, Marco called her into his study. He was standing by the window, looking out at the darkening grounds. "Paolo," he said, without turning around. "Tell me about him." Grace's blood ran cold. He already knew. He was testing her. This was the moment she had been dreading. A choice between her conscience and her survival. She could tell him the truth, sacrifice the boy, and secure her own precarious position. Or she could lie. "He is quiet," she said, her voice even. "He does his job. I have seen nothing unusual." The lie hung in the air between them, thick and heavy. He turned around slowly. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes searching hers. She met his gaze without flinching, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was a line. Once she crossed it, there was no going back. She was no longer just a witness. She was a player making a move in a game she did not understand. He was silent for a long time. She expected rage, a cold dismissal, the arrival of his men. Instead, he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "You have a misplaced sense of loyalty, Grace," he said, his voice quiet. "It's a rare quality. Dangerous, but rare." He did not punish her. He did not mention Paolo again. But the dynamic between them had shifted, fundamentally and forever. He had seen her lie for someone else, and in his world of constant betrayal, that act of flawed, defiant loyalty was a confession. It was more intimate than any touch, more binding than any promise. She had chosen a side, and in doing so had bound herself more tightly to him. The enemy, Luca, felt the shift as well. He saw the new proximity between his cousin and the maid. He saw the way Marco's eyes would follow her when she was in the room. Grace was no longer just a loose thread. She was becoming part of the fabric. And so Luca decided to burn it all down. It happened on a Thursday. Grace was in her room, the one next to Marco's, when she smelled it. The acrid scent of smoke. At first it was faint, but it grew stronger with alarming speed. She opened her door to a corridor filled with thick, black smoke. A fire. And it was close. Panic seized her, cold and sharp. She ran to the connecting door that led to Marco's suite, banging on it with her fists. Fire! The door was wrenched open from the other side. Marco stood there, already dressed, his face grim. He took one look at the smoke billowing down the hall and grabbed her arm. This way, he pulled her through his suite, toward the reinforced windows that led to a stone balcony. Below them, the garden was cast in an eerie orange glow. The fire was in her wing. It was for her. He did not hesitate. He lifted her over the railing as if she weighed nothing, his strength absolute. "Hold on to me." He wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her tight against his side, and with the other, he began to feel along the stone wall. He found what he was looking for, a series of ornamental iron trellises, old and strong. It was a climb, but it was a way down. The heat was intense, the smoke choking them. But his hold was an anchor in the chaos. He moved with a terrifying certainty, guiding them down the trellis, his body shielding hers from the worst of the heat. When their feet finally touched the soft grass of the lawn, they were both gasping for air, their faces smudged with soot. Men were shouting, running with hoses. The fire was being fought. But the message had been delivered. Marco turned her to face him, his hands gripping her shoulders. His eyes were blazing with a cold, lethal fury she had never seen before. "He came for you," he said, his voice a raw rasp. "He tried to take you from me." It was not a statement of fact. It was a declaration of ownership. In saving her, he had exposed himself. Everyone who saw him climb down that wall, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in his world, now knew. She was no longer just the maid. She was his. But that claim, born of fire and fury, did not make her safe. It made her the one target his enemies would prize above all others. The one vulnerability he could not afford to have. The fire marked the end of any pretense. Grace was no longer a servant, nor was she merely a protected asset. She was a symbol. To Marco's enemies, she was his weakness. To his men, she was a mystery, the unassuming woman who had somehow captured the absolute focus of their unreadable boss. She was moved into his suite permanently. She ate her meals with him in his private dining room, a silent observer at a table built for one. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the things they did not say, the questions he did not ask, and the answers she did not give. The family was restless. Luca's blatant attack had been a challenge not just to Marco, but to the entire structure of their organization. A sit-down was called, a meeting of the capos, the highest-ranking members of the family, to be held at the mansion. It was a trial, and everyone knew it. Luca would have to answer for his actions. Marco would have to prove he was still in control. The night of the meeting, the house was electric with tension. It was a fortress, silent men with guns posted at every entrance. Grace was confined to the suite, told not to leave under any circumstances. But she could not sit still. She paced the length of the vast bedroom, her mind racing. She knew Luca. He would not come to this meeting to apologize. He would come to finish what he started. From the window, she saw the cars arrive. Black sedans, gliding up the long driveway like sharks. She saw Luca get out of his car, flanked by two of his most loyal men. He looked up at the house, and for a chilling moment, his eyes seemed to find her window, his lips curling into that familiar, cruel smile. He was confident, too confident. A terrible certainty settled in her stomach. This meeting was a trap. She had to warn Marco, but the suite was locked from the outside. He had caged her for her own safety, but in doing so, he had blinded himself. She, the invisible maid, was the only one who knew the house's secret paths, its hidden arteries. She went to the back of the enormous walk-in closet, a space larger than her old bedroom. Behind a row of Marco's perfectly tailored suits was a wood panel she had discovered during her cleaning. It was a relic from the original construction, a sealed-off dumbwaiter shaft that ran down to the old kitchens in the basement. With trembling fingers, she worked the panel loose. The shaft was dark and narrow, filled with the smell of dust and disuse. It was a terrifying drop, but the old ropes and pulleys were still there, thick and strong. It was a risk, but staying here doing nothing was not an option. She had crossed a line when she lied for Paolo. She had been bound to him when he pulled her from the fire. This was the final step. She would not be a passive victim in his story. She would act. Holding the thick, greasy rope, she lowered herself into the darkness. Her hands burned, and her muscles screamed in protest. But she held on, descending floor by floor until her feet touched the solid ground of the basement. From there, she knew the way. Through a maze of service tunnels, she made her way to the main security room, avoiding the patrols of Luca's men, who were already quietly taking positions throughout the house. She burst into the room, startling the two men Marco had left on duty. They were his most trusted soldiers, men whose loyalty was absolute. "It's a trap," she gasped, leaning against the doorframe to catch her breath. "Luca's men are taking the house. They're going to hit the meeting." The men exchanged a look, a split second of disbelief warring with the urgency in her voice. Then, one of them, a grizzled older man named Sal, nodded. He trusted her because his boss trusted her. He hit a silent alarm, a signal that went only to the small, loyalist crew Marco had stationed outside as a contingency. Then he looked at her. "Stay here. You'll be safe." "No," Grace said, her voice firm. "He needs to know what's happening on the outside. They'll have cut communications. I know a way to get a message out." The final confrontation happened in the Grand Library, a room lined with thousands of books, a place where deals had been made and broken for generations. Luca made his move, his men drawing their weapons, cornering Marco and the handful of capos loyal to him. Luca was monologuing, savoring his victory, explaining how he would take over, how Marco had gone soft, distracted by a servant. It was then that the doors burst open. But it was not Luca's reinforcements. It was Sal, leading Marco's elite guard, appearing from passages Luca had not known existed. They moved with surgical precision, disarming Luca's men in a swift, brutal display of force. The trap had been turned on its head. Luca stared, his face a mask of disbelief. "How?" Marco did not look at his cousin. His eyes searched the room and then the corridor beyond. He was looking for her. Sal simply nodded in Marco's direction. "The girl," he said. "She warned us. The betrayal was dealt with. The cost was blood and the final severing of a family tie." The house fell silent once more, a quiet that was heavier, more final, than before. Grace waited in his study, the room where it had all begun. She stood by the side table, her hand resting near the silver frame holding Isabella's picture. She had done it. She had saved him. She had also cemented her place in this violent world forever. There was no going back. The door opened and he entered. He was weary, the weight of the night etched on his face. But when he saw her, something in his expression softened. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, his presence overwhelming the space. He looked down at her hand, then up at her face. "Everything I have," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion, "is built on loyalty. It is the only currency that matters. Tonight, you showed me its meaning." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers. "In my world, such a debt can only be repaid in one way." He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. It was the first time he had ever touched her with anything other than urgent possession. This was different. It was deliberate, reverent. "A man in my position needs a wife," he said, the words a quiet statement of fact. "Someone of absolute loyalty. Someone who sees the truth of this world and is not afraid." He looked at her soft curves, her steady eyes, her quiet strength. "You'd make a great bride, Grace." It was not a joke this time. It was not a proposal, not in the way the world outside these walls would understand it. It was a conclusion, the logical end to the path they had been on since the moment he first saw her in this room. Grace looked at the formidable, dangerous man before her. She thought of the life she had lost, and the strange, perilous life she had found. She was no longer invisible. She was essential. She smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I would need a groom for that," she said. It was not a question. It was her answer, her choice. He took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. The signet ring on his finger, the symbol of all his power and all his pain, was cold against her skin, felt like a vow. In this house of shadows and secrets, they had found their own brutal, unbreakable truth. And it was enough.